The vast darkness of space near Jupiter's orbit was disrupted by an anomaly, the sudden appearance of a gargantuan vessel unlike any constructed by human hands. The world's space agencies, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. At the helm of Earth's immediate investigation was Captain James Mercer of the UNS Resolute, a seasoned officer known for his calm under pressure. "Captain, sensors confirm it's not one of ours, and definitely not anything the Russians or Chinese could have upped us with," Lieutenant Carl Jenkins, the ship's chief science officer, reported, his eyes fixed on the readouts flashing across his console. James peered at the holographic display showcasing the alien craft structure. "Any life signs, Carl?" "Multiple. It's teeming with activity. They're definitely alive and kicking, and their tech is light years ahead of ours." James nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities and dangers. "Open a channel. Let's not start off on the wrong foot." He straightened his uniform, preparing for the first contact. Beside him, Communications Officer Mark Lee adjusted the transmission settings, a slight tremor in his hands betraying his nerves. The alien communication came through, a complex array of sounds that the UNS Resolute's computers began to decode. "We are receiving their language, working on real-time translation now," Mark announced. The tension in the bridge was palpable as the alien voice transformed into comprehensible English. "Greetings from the Zaltrons. We come in peace and wish to engage in cultural exchange." James took a deep breath, stepping closer to the communication panel. "This is Captain James Mercer of the United Nations Spaceship Resolute, representing Earth. We welcome you and are open to peaceful interactions." A figure appeared on the screen, its features distinct yet unsettlingly non-human, with translucent skin and luminous eyes. "I am High Commander Kexor of the Zaltron. We are explorers much like yourselves." "Commander Kexor, we are honored. What brings you to our solar system?" James asked, maintaining a diplomatic tone. "Our mission is one of knowledge and understanding. Your species has been under observation due to your rapid development and expansion into space." James exchanged a quick glance with Carl, whose expression mirrored his own concern. "Observed? For how long?" "Several of your orbits. We mean no intrusion. We find your race's progress fascinating, especially your survival through adversities and your technological advancements." Carl whispered to James, "Ask them about their interest in our military capabilities." Nodding subtly, James turned back to the screen. "We are flattered by your interest. We've also made strides in various fields, including peacekeeping and defense. Is this something your civilization is interested in discussing?" High Commander Kexor paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Indeed, Captain Mercer. We seek to understand all facets of those we encounter. We are particularly interested in how you maintain peace within your species." James sensed the underlying tone of the question. "Through diplomacy and, when necessary, defensive measures. Our weapons are designed to protect us from internal and external threats." "We have observed as much. Your weapons are quite advanced," Kexor noted, with a hint of what could be concern. James felt a chill run down his spine. The conversation was veering into dangerous waters, but it was vital to navigate these early discussions carefully. "Our advances are meant to ensure the safety of our people. Perhaps we can share our experiences in more peaceful applications." "That would be most enlightening," Kexor replied, though his voice lacked warmth. As the screen blinked off, Carl turned to James, his face serious. "Do you trust them, Captain?" James considered the question. "I'm not sure yet, Carl, but I intend to find out. Keep monitoring their ship. Any anomaly, no matter how small, I want to know about it." "Yes, Captain." As the crew of the UNS Resolute prepared for what was to come, James knew they stood on the brink of something monumental. The coming days would either usher in a new era of interstellar friendship or plunge them into unfathomable conflict. In the confines of his office aboard the UNS Resolute, Captain James Mercer reviewed the data streams flowing in from the surveillance drones discreetly circling the Zaltron ship. Lieutenant Carl Jenkins and Communications Officer Mark Lee stood by, their faces reflecting the gravity of their covert mission. "Any peculiar findings?" James inquired, his eyes not leaving the screen. Carl adjusted his glasses, pointing to a series of encrypted signals they had intercepted. "Their tech is sophisticated, but we've managed to break some of their encryption. It seems like they've been gathering detailed information about our military capabilities, far beyond just a cursory scan." Mark chimed in with a concerned tone. "There's more, Captain. I've been analyzing the communications back to their home planet. The translations are rough, but it seems they're reporting quite extensively about our weapon systems and defensive infrastructure. James leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. They portrayed themselves as peaceful explorers. This level of interest in our defenses suggests otherwise. The room was silent for a moment before Carl broke the stillness. Do you think they're preparing for something aggressive? It's too early to jump to conclusions, James cautioned, but we need to be prepared for any possibility. Keep this between us for now. I don't want to cause a panic until we know more. Nodding in agreement, Mark added, Should I continue to feign ignorance in our communications? Yes, maintain normal relations, but keep gathering whatever intelligence you can. Every piece of information is crucial, James directed. The following days were spent in intense observation and analysis. James met regularly with his senior officers to discuss their findings and strategize. During one such meeting, Sergeant Tom Reynolds, the head of the ship's security team, reported a suspicious delay in the Zaltron's communication responses. It's like they're deliberating over each message, maybe trying to decide how much to reveal, Tom noted, his brow furrowed. That's not all, Carl added, pulling up a 3D model of the Zaltron ship. We've detected unusual energy spikes from their core every time they send out a major transmission. It doesn't seem related to normal ship functions. James pondered the implications. They could be powering up something significant, or it might be a weapon. The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of potential conflict hanging over them. James stood up, his resolve hardening. Increase our readiness levels. I want short-range defensive measures on standby, and inform the crew to be on alert but discreet. We can't show our hand yet. Understood, Captain, Tom replied, his voice steady. As the Zaltron ship loomed large outside the viewport, its sleek metallic surface gleaming ominously under the sun's rays, James felt the burden of command heavier than ever. He knew that the decisions he made in the coming days could either preserve peace or plunge humanity into an interstellar war. Let's keep digging, James instructed as he dismissed the meeting. We need a full picture before making any moves. Our response must be calculated and precise. Back on the bridge, James watched the stars flicker in the infinite black, aware that the fragile piece hanging in the balance was as volatile as the void itself. Back on Earth, the news of the Zaltron surveillance stirred a storm of debate among the world leaders convened at the United Nations headquarters. General Frank Dawson, a military advisor appointed to represent Earth's strategic interests, stood before the assembly, detailing the potential threat posed by the Zaltron interest in human weaponry. Their surveillance extends beyond passive observation. We have evidence suggesting a deep interest in our defense mechanisms and weapon systems, General Dawson reported, his voice echoing in the silent hall. Captain James Mercer, who had been called back to Earth to participate in the discussions, stood by the general's side, lending his first-hand experience to the gravity of the situation. Beside him, Carl Jenkins and Mark Lee provided technical support, ready with data and translations to back their claims. President Maria Alvarez, chairing the session, addressed the assembly. The question before us is clear. How do we respond to a potential threat that may be cloaked in diplomacy, but could very well be preparation for aggression? A murmur of concern swept through the room. The Chinese delegate, Ambassador Chen, suggested caution. We must not provoke a war based on suspicion alone. Perhaps a demonstration of our capabilities would serve as a deterrent rather than an invitation to conflict. The Russian ambassador disagreed, his voice stern. A show of force might be perceived as an act of war. We should instead increase our surveillance and prepare our defenses without escalating the situation. James took the floor, his expression composed yet firm. With all due respect, we've seen what can happen when threats are underestimated. I recommend a balanced approach. Strengthen our defenses, continue surveillance, but also keep the lines of communication open with the Zaltrons. The room fell into a thoughtful silence, considering his words. As the debate continued, reports came in of a sudden and unprovoked attack on a human outpost in the asteroid belt. The room erupted into chaos, with delegates scrambling for information. General Dawson regained control of the room. This changes everything. We need to respond. James, feeling the weight of imminent conflict, proposed, Let me speak with the Zaltrons. Perhaps there's still a chance for peace. With the Assembly's reluctant agreement, James returned to the Resolute, which was now stationed near the site of the attack. As he approached the bridge, he received a transmission from High Commander Kexor. Captain Mercer, we we regret the incident at your outpost. It was a rogue faction within our ranks, not representative of our intentions. Kexer's voice was strained, a hint of desperation underlying his words. James, skeptical yet hopeful, responded, "This incident has cost lives, Commander. Trust is not easily rebuilt, but I am willing to listen if you are willing to explain." As the transmission ended, James convened his senior officers. "We're in a precarious position," he began, addressing the crew. "Prepare for any outcome. While I strive for peace, be ready for war." Tom Reynolds nodded. "Defensive positions are ready, Captain. All systems on high alert." James stared into the vastness of space, the stars now overshadowed by the looming threat of war. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," he muttered, unsure if the Zaltrons could indeed be trusted or if humanity was on the brink of an interstellar conflict. The situation escalated rapidly as reports of further skirmishes along the human-Zaltron border began to flood in. Each incident seemed to erode what little trust remained between the two races. On board the UNS Resolute, Captain James Mercer convened his top advisors for a strategy session. "Every skirmish we've encountered has been initiated by what the Zaltrons claim are rogue factions. But the frequency of these attacks suggests a more coordinated effort than they admit," James stated, reviewing the latest incident reports. Sergeant Tom Reynolds, always forthright, chimed in. "It's hard to see it as anything but deliberate, Captain. They're testing our defenses, seeing how we respond." Lieutenant Carl Jenkins added, "And our responses have likely been under close scrutiny. They're cataloging our capabilities, Captain." The strategic team, gathered around the holographic table displaying the latest tactical data, could sense the creeping inevitability of war. Mark Lee, who had been monitoring communications, looked up from his console. "There's been a significant increase in military chatter on their channels. I think they're preparing for something bigger." James nodded grimly. "Prepare a briefing for Earth Command. We need to discuss potential offensive operations. We can't just stay on the defensive." As the preparations for the briefing went underway, James took a moment to reflect on the window of his office, looking out into the vast, dark cosmos. The weight of his next decisions would potentially affect billions of lives. After a few minutes of contemplation, he left his office to join the briefing. In the secure communications room, a virtual meeting with Earth's top military and political leaders was set up. General Frank Dawson appeared on the main screen, his expression stern. "Captain Mercer, given the latest developments, we might need to consider taking the fight to them. If we can disable their primary warship, it might cripple their ability to wage an organized war," Dawson proposed. James understood the rationale but remained cautious. A direct assault could escalate things further. "We need a plan that minimizes the risk of a full-scale war." Ambassador Chen, representing the diplomatic corps, suggested an alternative. "What if we demonstrate our capabilities in a non-lethal way? Show them the power we can unleash, but without actual destruction. It might force them back to the negotiating table." James considered the suggestion. "It's a balance of showing strength while keeping a door open for peace. I agree with the ambassador. Let's plan a show of force, large enough to be taken seriously but non-lethal, targeting their unmanned facilities if possible." The leaders agreed on this course of action, and James began coordinating with his tactical teams. Plans for a large-scale, precision strike on a remote Zaltron satellite array were set into motion. Days later, the Resolute and its accompanying fleet maneuvered into position. The operation was to be a tightrope walk between assertiveness and restraint, a demonstration of power that needed to communicate unspoken threats without crossing into open hostility. James addressed his crew before the operation commenced. "Today, we walk a fine line between peace and war. Our goal is not to destroy, but to deter. Let's show them that humanity stands united, not just in our capacity to fight, but in our desire to preserve peace." With the fleet in position, the order was given. A volley of precision-guided electromagnetic pulses was launched towards the Zaltron satellite array, designed to disable without causing irreversible damage. Surrendering the satellite array inert, all eyes turned to the Zaltron response. The next moves by both sides would determine whether diplomacy would have another chance, or if the solar system was on the brink of an all-out war. Following the non-lethal strike on the Zaltron satellite array, tensions heightened as humanity awaited the alien response. The UNS Resolute and its fleet hovered near Mars, ready for any retaliation. Captain James Mercer stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the monitors displaying the red planet and the surrounding space. Lieutenant Carl Jenkins broke the tense silence. Captain, we're detecting a large fleet movement from the Zaltrons. It looks like they're positioning for an offensive. James tightened his grip on the console. Any specifics on their armament or tactics? Carl adjusted his monitor. It's hard to say, Captain. Their technology masks much of the detail, but it's clear they're bringing considerable firepower. Sergeant Tom Reynolds prepared the crew for a possible encounter. All hands battle stations. This is not a drill. Prepare for potential engagement. James communicated directly with Earth Command, relaying the situation. General Frank Dawson's voice crackled through the comms. Understood, Captain Mercer. You have authorization to engage defensively. Protect Mars and the fleet, but avoid escalating if possible. As the Zaltron fleet advanced, their strategy became clear. They intended to test Earth's defenses by forcing an engagement near Mars, a crucial outpost for Earth's space mining operations. James knew the importance of Mars, not just strategically, but also symbolically. Losing Mars would be a significant blow to Earth's morale and resources. The first volleys of Zaltron fire were met with precision counterstrikes from the Resolute and its allied ships. The battle was fierce, with both sides exchanging heavy fire. James coordinated the fleet's movements and attacks from the bridge, his calm demeanor helping to steady his crew. Mark Lee, monitoring the communications, reported a new development. Captain, the Zaltrons are hailing us. They're requesting a ceasefire to negotiate. James considered the offer. The battle had been costly on both sides, and the Zaltrons might have realized they underestimated Earth's military capabilities. Open a channel, Mark. Let's hear what they have to propose. The image of High Commander Kexer appeared on the screen, his face marked by the stress of battle. Captain Mercer, this conflict serves neither of our interests. We propose a ceasefire and parley on the Martian surface. James replied, We'll agree to the ceasefire, Commander, but the parley will happen in neutral space. The UNS Peacekeeper will serve as the venue. Do we have an accord? Kexer nodded. Agreed, Captain. We will meet in one cycle at your Peacekeeper. As the ceasefire took effect, James ordered the fleet to maintain a defensive perimeter. The crew worked tirelessly to repair damage and prepare for the possibility that talks might fail. The meeting on the UNS Peacekeeper was tense. James led the delegation with a clear goal, to secure a lasting peace if possible, or at least a stable standoff. During negotiations, Kexer revealed the internal pressure from more militant factions within his command, which had pushed for the test of strength against Earth. James listened intently, understanding the delicate balance of power Kexer was navigating. We can provide assurances of non-aggression, Commander, but only if you control your factions. We will not tolerate further unprovoked attacks. The talks stretched for hours, with both sides tentatively outlining terms for a truce. As they concluded, James felt cautiously optimistic. They had avoided a disaster for now, but the road ahead would require careful diplomacy and vigilance. Returning to the Resolute, James looked out towards Mars, now peaceful under the ceasefire. The battle might have ended, but the war for lasting peace had just begun. After the tense negotiations aboard the UNS Peacekeeper, a fragile truce settled over the Martian sector. Yet the quiet was anything but comforting to Captain James Mercer, who remained vigilant aboard the UNS Resolute. The recent battles had shown the Zaltrons were formidable opponents, and their internal discord suggested that peace might be tenuous. Captain, our long-range sensors are picking up strange energy fluctuations from the Zaltron flagship, reported Lieutenant Carl Jenkins during a routine status meeting. James, intrigued and concerned, leaned forward. Define strange energy fluctuations, Carl. It's unlike anything we've seen before. It could be a new weapon or a power source, but whatever it is, it's unstable, Carl explained, adjusting the display to show the energy signatures. Sergeant Tom Reynolds, who had been overseeing the SE HIP's armament upgrades, chimed in. If they're developing something new, we should prepare for the worst. Our defenses held last time, but we were lucky. Mark Lee, who had been monitoring communications, added a crucial piece of information. There's also been a spike in encrypted messages to and from the flagship. It looks like they're planning something big. James considered their options. Let's not wait to find out what they're up to. Carl, enhance our surveillance on that flagship. Tom, continue with the armament upgrades, and Mark, keep an eye on those communications. I want to know the moment they make a move. As the crew intensified their watch, James devised a daring plan to gain more information. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. I'm planning a covert mission to approach the Zaltron flagship. We'll use one of our smaller, stealth-equipped shuttles to get close. The mission was risky, but the need for intelligence outweighed the dangers. James selected a small team for the operation, including himself. The stealth shuttle, piloted by Lieutenant Amy Chen, a skilled pilot known for her precision and calm under pressure, maneuvered close to the Zaltron flagship under the cover of a nearby asteroid field. Inside the shuttle, James and his team used specialized scanning equipment to probe the flagship. The readings confirmed Carl's fears. The Zaltrons were indeed charging a weapon, potentially powerful enough to threaten Earth's entire space infrastructure. "All right, we have what we need. Let's get back to the Resolute," James ordered, just as the shuttle's alarms blared, a sign they'd been detected. Amy's quick reflexes saved them from immediate capture, piloting the shuttle through hazardous asteroid terrain, evading Zaltron pursuit. They returned to the Resolute with the critical data, but aware that their time was running short. Back aboard the Resolute, James convened an emergency meeting with his senior staff and Earth Command. General Dawson, upon reviewing the findings, gave the go-ahead for a preemptive strike. "We can't let them complete that weapon. It's now or never." James strategized with his team to disrupt the Zaltron weapon's charging process. Utilizing a combination of electromagnetic pulses and targeted strikes, they aimed to disable the flagship's power core without triggering a full-scale war. The operation was set into motion with meticulous care. As the Resolute and its fleet launched their assault, the Zaltrons, caught off guard by the sudden and precise nature of the attack, struggled to respond. The attack successfully disrupted the weapon's charge cycle, causing it to destabilize and rendering it inoperable. High Commander Kexor, facing a significant setback and realizing the futility of further escalation, requested a ceasefire. In the aftermath, James met with Kexor via a secure channel. "This could have ended very differently for both of us," James stated plainly. "Let's negotiate a real peace this time. No more surprises." Kexor, chastened and aware of the precariousness of his position, agreed. "Agreed, Captain Mercer. We have much to discuss." As communications ended, James looked around at his crew, their faces weary but relieved. The turning point had been reached, but the road ahead would require careful navigation. The war had been averted for now, but the peace was still to be secured. The ceasefire held for several tense days as both Earth and the Zaltron fleet regrouped. However, it was a fragile peace, marred by the shadow of the Zaltron's previously concealed weapon and the looming threat it represented. While negotiations seemed promising, within the Zaltron ranks, discontent simmered among the more militant factions, leading to a drastic and unforeseen escalation. Aboard the UNS Resolute, Captain James Mercer received urgent reports from his surveillance teams. "Captain, we've detected a significant mobilization of the Zaltron fleet. They're moving towards Earth," Lieutenant Carl Jenkins reported, his voice tense. James immediately convened an emergency strategy session with his senior staff and liaisons from Earth Command. "They're not just posturing. This looks like a final push to tip the balance," James analyzed the fleet movements on the tactical display. Sergeant Tom Reynolds added, "Our intel suggests that General Zyron, a hardliner, has taken over their command. It seems he's not interested in peace." The mood was grave. Earth's defenses were formidable but not invincible, especially against a full-scale assault. James knew that the fate of Earth hung in the balance. "We can't let them reach Earth. We need to intercept them here." He pointed at a strategic point in space on the map. "Near the moon. It's our best chance to use the moon's gravitational field to our advantage." As the Zaltron fleet advanced, Earth's forces prepared for a confrontation that would likely decide the future of human-Zaltron relations. The UNS Resolute and its allied ships took position, their weapon systems armed and ready. The battle commenced with a flurry of energy blasts and missiles as the Zaltron fleet entered the lunar orbit. James coordinated the defense efforts, his voice a constant presence over the comms, directing ships, deploying fighter squads, and managing counterattacks. In the midst of the chaos, a desperate plan formed in James's mind. "If we can take out Zyron's command ship, we might demoralize them enough to end this," he suggested to his tactical team. Using the Resolute's advanced cloaking technology, James led a small strike team aboard a swift cruiser, slipping through the Zaltron lines to approach General Zyron's flagship. The mission was perilous, but the potential reward outweighed the risks. The cruiser, piloted by Lieutenant Amy Chen, maneuvered close to the Zaltron flagship, evading sensors and guard ships. James and his team boarded the enemy ship, engaging in intense close-quarters combat. After a fierce battle through the corridors, they reached the command center, where James confronted General Zyron. "End this madness, Zyron. You've lost. Further bloodshed is pointless, James shouted over the blare of alarms. Zyron, defiant to the end, refused to surrender. Our cause is just, Mercer. We will not yield. The standoff was brief. Realizing the futility of further resistance and the devastation around him, Zyron finally capitulated when his own crew began to stand down, swayed by the inevitability of defeat. James and his team secured the flagship and immediately initiated communications with both the Zaltron fleet and Earth Command. This is Captain Mercer. General Zyron is in custody. Stand down and cease fire. I repeat, cease fire. The message rippled across space, and slowly the firing ceased. As the dust settled, James negotiated the terms of surrender with the remaining Zaltron commanders, ensuring a secure and lasting peace. Returning to the UNS Resolute, James looked out upon the battered fleets, the moon looming large behind them. The battle had been won, but the cost was evident in the debris that scattered the lunar orbit. James felt a profound sense of relief mixed with sorrow for the lives lost. Yet he also knew that this victory was crucial not just for Earth's survival, but for the future of human and Zaltron relations. After the intense confrontation and subsequent negotiations, Earth and the Zaltron fleet finally arrived at a delicate peace. The signing of the treaty took place on the UNS Peacekeeper, symbolically located halfway between Earth and the Zaltron's primary vessel. Captain James Mercer, who had become a figure of considerable respect and diplomacy, led the Earth delegation. As he stood by the large viewport overlooking the vast expanse of space, James reflected on the tumultuous events that had led to this moment. The room behind him buzzed with the final preparations as delegates from both sides mingled, discussing the future with cautious optimism. Captain Mercer, called a voice. James turned to see Ambassador Chen, who had been instrumental in the diplomatic efforts. Today marks a new chapter thanks to your leadership. How does it feel to be part of history? James smiled, his eyes reflecting a myriad of emotions. It's a relief, Ambassador. But more than that, it's a responsibility. We've laid down the arms, and now we must build trust, a much harder task. The ceremony began with speeches from both Earth leaders and the new Zaltron Council, each expressing commitments to peace and acknowledging the sacrifices made by both sides. When it came time for James to speak, he approached the podium with a clear sense of duty. Ladies and gentlemen, beings of the Zaltron Assembly, James began, his voice steady and commanding. Today we stand at the threshold of a new era. The treaty we sign is not just a promise to put down our weapons, but a commitment to uphold our mutual interests, respect, and integrity. As the applause echoed through the chamber, the documents were signed, sealed with handshakes that were broadcast across the solar system. The moment was historic, symbolizing not just the end of conflict, but the beginning of cooperation. In the days that followed, James returned to his duties with a new perspective. The Resolute was tasked with patrolling the new borders and assisting in the establishment of joint outposts as defined by the treaty. During one such mission, James visited a newly established cultural exchange facility on Mars, where humans and Zaltrons shared knowledge and resources. Walking through the corridors, James observed the interactions, noting the cautious yet genuine attempts at understanding each other's cultures. It's going to be a long road, but we're walking it, he remarked to Carl Jenkins, who had accompanied him. Yes, Captain. It's strange to think about how close we came to a different outcome, Carl replied, looking around at the peaceful cooperation. As the mission concluded, James stood once again before the stars, pondering the future. The war had shown the devastating potential of conflict between civilizations, but peace was proving its potential for prosperity and unity. Back on Earth, news of the successful integration efforts brought hope to a world that had been on the brink of despair. For James, the accolades mattered less than the new opportunities for peace and the promise of a united future. As the chapter of war closed, a new chapter of collaboration and understanding began, with humanity and the Zaltrons cautiously navigating their shared future. For Captain James Mercer, this was not just the end of a long journey, but the beginning of another, perhaps even more challenging, but undoubtedly rewarding.